Raquel Phillips. I am uh, hmm, an artist first. There's a lot of things that people said that I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm an artist, and I am 46 years old and grew up in the area and committed to this area. My practice is wrapped around Philadelphia, and I love this city for reasons that I will explain. Try and stop these noises. So I grew up in South Jersey, Camden County and Gloucester County, moving around in a bunch of little towns there. You know, I had a lot of trauma in my early childhood, which has continued to be a part of my life and my information and how I kind of go about living on a daily basis. So in ways of practice, being mindful, tuning in, trying to connect and listen, because I created a lot of not helpful coping skills, helpful when I was young, and not helpful for me as an adult. So I grew up as an only child and a latchkey kid. I had an incarcerated father who was chemical dependent, and a mother who was dependent on food. And so there was just this kind of thing going on around, and I got into this fantasy world, and that was my escape. And so being a gymnast and a dancer, which put me in the world of riding a unicycle and being a square dancer and all these kind of weird things, I spent a lot of time alone and created these kind of shows of my own. And I had a little kind of stage outside of our apartment that I could put on these performances, and I could choreograph my friends when they were around. And this was how I sort of survived. This was my survival. And this is how I survive today. And this is what's so important. You know, sometimes like we grow up and we seek to make all these changes to improve ourselves, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then upon reflection, when I look at myself, I go, I am exactly the same person that I was when I was a child, you know, hopefully with the knowledge that and the wisdom that you gain when you move into adulthood. But I have always been into the arts. That's all I've ever wanted to do. It's all I knew how to do. And when I got out of high school and was heading to go to Moore College of Art, I also started getting into bars, and I got a little spooked and did not go to the big school because my family really couldn't afford school. So I went to community college, and I didn't take it seriously. But I took going out very seriously, and investing in that area of escape, which was also fun at the time. And moved to Philadelphia when I was 19, and heavily invested in that, and also began to work as a go-go girl, a stripper, a sex worker, whatever you want to call it. And I was in that world for a few years, and I worked in, you know, some of the larger clubs, but I also all family, which was on 13th. Family has learned about like these friendships that could come from all these different places, and that's really why I came, because where I was was othered so deeply that I needed to find my people. And I really felt like I found my people in the family. It was very core. It was very working class. It was also very artist heavy. it kind of had everything. And I could find myself there as a mixed person, as a person who had grown up with a sort of sense of lack, both told and both felt, and a reality. And so there were all these things that I kind of found there in all these people, and I still consider a lot of these people my closest friends and family today. I probably left out things that I think are important in there, but that is kind of like the roundabout. I also, I got sober when I was 24 years old. And so that's when sort of life started taking this new direction. So all of my information comes from a place that's like atypical. I went to school when I was in my late 20s, and then I went back to school when I was in my early 40s. And all of this like allowed me to have the timeline that I needed. You know, I've been told all the messages that most of us have about when we're supposed to do things and how we're supposed to do things and what our lives should look like. And so that's why when I present my work, I talk a lot about failure. Failure as a way to be, as a resistance to what I've been told I should do, as a resistance to the power structures and the societal structures that guide us. And I think all of that is really important to know, and I'll expand upon all of that. This is very like sort of me freely talking, which is not the easiest thing for me to do, but I practice it and I try it and I try it and I try it because as a child and growing up, I didn't say anything. I didn't think that my words were valuable. And now I have found communities and a way to value myself and what I have to bring to the table it's actually very important. And I've made those discoveries along the way. So anyway, I'll start rambling. So let me move on to my presentation and we can connect the dots. Also, as I show this work, please feel free to jump in if you have questions. I do not mind at all. So deviance, pleasure, power, failure. Okay, so my practice bounces between documentary, like art documentary work and conceptual work. It's all rooted in social change. I try to be as democratic in my approach as I can be, because I want to welcome anyone into the conversation. I want people to appreciate the subjects that I work with. I want the audience to care about and invest in the models and actors that I use in my work. I often think that conceptual work can be very, very alienating. So I aim to speak with those with both an art language and the lay person and allow anybody to take away. So something I heard in the introductions. This is my first, what I consider my first successful self-portrait. I did not find photography as a medium until I was about 30. And finally it clicked. So I said I was into art all my life and I was always drawing and taking art classes and all that business. But it never clicked. Like I never felt like I could get that thing that felt like I was expressing through the work. You know, so I could look at something and I could draw it okay. And I could, you know, maybe sculpt something and it would come out okay, but nothing was really making sense to me. But when I found photo, I immediately like felt it. And so early in my practice, I used my own body to explore my personal history as a way to sort through the issues regarding the childhood trauma, as a way to sort through the experiences related to domestic violence and chemical dependency and the incarceration of my father and being a parentified daughter. And all of this stuff sort of was in sync with these like topics around the structures of race and class and otherness. The tableau vivant, or the narrative photo process, really became my escape. It was very parallel to the fantasy world I created when I was a child. I was experimenting with this kind of like dark humor and camp sensibility, you know, DIY, and performance. So these were all things that I had brought in that I'd kind of been using all my life, and sort of didn't even realize that I was doing that. You know, I've unpacked this throughout the years. So, you know, loving thrift shopping and just rummaging and finding these kind of treasures. I could kind of go into my own closets and pull out something, or I could, like, if I wanted something, you know, to express something, I could just search for it rather than, you know, go into my pockets and really try and like purchase the thing. It was all about putting the thing together in this sort of magical way. A lot of imagery comes into my work. So, you know, there's kind of this constant return to religious iconography. I wasn't raised really religious. I wasn't forced to go to church. I went for a little bit, and then I said, I don't really like this. And my mom said, well, you don't have to go. But there was this strange sort of envy of Catholicism that I always had. And I think it's just because the, you know, the iconography was so kind of dramatic. And so I see that come in often, right? I see these like auras in these images, and then these works are sort of like, they have this foundation in sort of these ideas of 7 deadly sin, but there are about desire and about need. And so anyway, I'll keep moving. We can see these more clearly. Working through, right, these sort of fantasy spaces mixed with my own personal experience. I did this at the beginning of my graduate studies at UPenn. I felt extremely shook in that space, and that and imposter syndrome. I was waiting to be called a fraud. I cried on my way to school every day. I felt very, very isolated and alone. And so this became a way that I processed that, titled Family Dinner. So just kind of exploring these ideas, you know, lots and lots. I often, these are actually my first self-portraits that I did that included a sculptural piece. So these were just little, you know, religious iconography or iconographic sculptures that I had made and pulled in to make these sort of saintly portraits. Again, like this sort of high drama. The pregnancy shows up all the time in my self-portraits. You know, and I don't even know, there's so many things other people could pull it out, but the insistence on childbearing, the pressures that, you know, are given to young women. And I never wanted children. I started with the pregnant self in my first self-portrait, which I didn't show. It was in black and white. I never had a real interest in black and white for my practice, but I had actually had it's called a myomectomy, I guess, where I had a really large tumor, fibroid tumor removed from my uterus. And so I had used the sort of pregnant belly to represent that. And the way that people interpreted that was really interesting, because I was coming from this whole other angle that, you know, who would ever think that? But it has stayed with me, and I'll talk about it more later when I show some video. So moving on from that, I want to talk about the other side of my practice, which is, art documentary. So this was my first art doc project. So because, my foundation, my first basis of not fitting in is from being mixed, I did this project called Mixed. And this was in like 2008. And all I did was just find people that I either knew, was friends with, that I met on the street, and I just asked people, and I had to learn a lot. I learned so much from this project about like how to just kind of tune into people and on like a vibrational, energetic level and how to speak to people. How do you ask somebody if they're mixed? This is a question that I exist with just about every day of my life. So do you want to be, do I ask this person, excuse me, can I ask you, are you biracial? Excuse me, can I ask you, like, hey, are you mixed, right? Like how do you approach these questions? And so the only thing I wanted to do was to take a picture of the person on the street in Philadelphia, because I came here to meet my people. And so that was important to me. And I wound up taking close to 50 portraits and showing them in about 2009, I believe. And it was, I don't know that I'll ever match that project with a level of importance that I feel that it had. I looked around that room and I saw an audience that I had never experienced before in a gallery. And I saw this like pride, and I heard these conversations, and I got this feedback from the sitters of like, I never realized how much this affected me. We saw ourselves, and it's so important to be able to see yourself. And so that was then something that I wanted to really continue in this way, in the area of representing people and diverse groups of people in order to allow ourselves to see ourselves. To speak with the documentary voice always felt important to me as an artist, because I have a tool that I can use that can help make change, that can create conversations potentially. And so it felt like a responsibility. And then when I hit this stride, it felt really good and right. I had done actually a little bit of documentary work before this, but this felt like a shift. And then from there, moving on and really like working with other people in the other mode. So then I started bringing in people and experimenting with what's it look like when I work sort of in my self-portrait style with other bodies. So this is where I start bringing in larger conversations about sexuality and fetish, about failure to adhere to social constructs, about deviance, about gender expression, and how power structures try to determine this. And then into this project, which then was like sort of this like bringing these kind of, I guess, I don't want to say singular ideas, but ideas that were made in like sort of single image ways into a project that included a number of people. And so Sexy Singles was the title of this project. It was kind of like, I think like maybe 10 images or something. It wasn't very large, but Philadelphians, we know the Sexy Singles run in the Daily News every September-ish. It's sort of a ridiculous run of images for a week of like our Philadelphia sexy singles. And so, I would always look at this every year and I'd be like, this is so absurd. Like, it's hilarious. Dramatic images of people who were maybe single. Some of them be like, I have a partner. I'm like, what is this? how do they choose these people? Where do they come from? So I based these all in sort of these like 80s tropes, like the man eater here. I forget what this was called. Move on. Hard hat, sausage party. So starting to bring in these like tropes and stereotypes and using them in these subversive ways allowed me to like start queering the depictions with specific models in mind. And it really started lending itself to what would become a truly collaborative process in how I build characters. And here is, I think these were like, this was maybe the first one I made, Gym Rat and Sensitive Urban Cowboy. So this is one of my best friends, Jack W. Cooper, who one might say is my muse. We laugh about that. But we've worked together so much, and I process so much together with him. But this is a friend of mine who asked me to collaborate on this documentary project, creating these conceptual images, but to document his transition. And so this was the first image that we started with. And we took these photos in front of this small corner church in South Philly. And again, like, so his idea was to speak through our friendship, through our connections and our friendship and the ways that we related, and to bring our experiences in life, which seem so parallel, into this space of oneness. And so to sort of speak through the love and to also take note. And I was also on this journey with him of, you know, going to get the legal name change and, you know, his wedding and adoption of his daughter. Like there were all these things that were happening, and it was really an incredible experience. So bringing these ideas together, this is Cooper's from Texas, and this is in my hometown. This is a creek, which I was forbidden to go into. And he's bringing this like religious kind of Baptist background into it. And so it was like a really nice sort of like merge into one. And then sometimes the images, and sometimes my work is just very one-to-one. You know, this was quite literally what he wanted for his birthday. And so his wife made him nachos and served him in the bathtub where he's always taking a hot soak because he's an old man. And having a phone call with me. So just recreating this thing, right? Life, we don't have to make things up sometimes because life is absurd enough. And then just more spontaneous. This was just spontaneous. This is him showing off his first chest hair. And let's lead into this one right now. I feel like there's a lot in between here. So let me see. Oh, this is just out of order. That's why. One moment. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to my website real quick. I want to talk a little bit about textiles. So I wound up working in textiles, I don't know how, maybe accidentally, a few years back. I was working in this project about a cheerleader. I was at Penn, I was going into my second year, and I made this giant banner to go across the back of my studio that said, fuck off. And it was like, you know, it was this very kind of blunt message. And, you know, I was questioned on it, but it felt right at the time. And I needed that. I needed that as a message out to Penn at the moment, like, and to myself, like, you are welcome wherever you go. This is, you know, this is your energy that's telling you you don't belong here. Even though I know it's much more complicated than that, I had to stand in my power. And so this sort of stance transitioned in my practice as well. And so I started making these flags, which have kind of taken on their own life and have become like, at this point in time, I've actually had a show now that was just textile based, which is pretty amazing to me, because I'm all self-taught. I've never taken any kind of textile course or anything. It's brought drawing back into my practice. So this is a series that is based on flagging. And so these are double-sided pennants, but I work with pennants, with banners, with flags, all as a way to sort of like bring in these different ideas. Like it started with the banners, thinking about how, you know, in high school, I'd go into the cafeteria and they'd have all these banners hanging up all throughout, and they were all celebrating, you know, these athletic accomplishments, you know, and then we had the trophy cases that centered, you know, athletes as well. And it was like, well, who do we celebrate, right? Who do we not celebrate? And so I was thinking about all of that, right? Pennants are often like, you know, they're showing some sort of pride in like an academic institution, but they're also like hanging all over like, you know, stores and car lots. So they're advertising something. So that lent itself to this idea around flagging. And so let me see, how do I do this? So drawing, how do I draw? I draw with felt and with sequins. And it's a lot of fun. And I'm still learning. So it adds that element of like development, because I would be a student in an institution for the rest of time if I could be, because I love it. And then also just kind of like pushing these boundaries and speaking through the multiple lenses that I see through. Talking about power. And then these are banners. So my banners generally go into this place of protect mode. So using symbolism that is to ward off evil or negativity, to uplift. These were actually the first ones that I showed in a show. They're very, very, very rough, very DIY, which all of my work is based in the do-it-yourself. But I just took these expressions. I was existing in my studio space with these words all over, insults, things that I've heard people say that are pretty terrible when talking about other people. So I'd never forget, I'd heard this expression when I was bartending one night. This woman walked in and a guy said, wow, she looks like she's been rode hard and put up wet. And I was like, wow, like, I'm like, oh, like, I don't even know really what it means. But it's awful. And so good from far, but far from good, these things that I've heard, and just deciding like, well, how do we own these things? How do we exist with these, you know, not just these things, but like slurs, right? I was a child, I was being called slurs. I was holding them in myself, not telling anybody. And so how do we process these things? And then how do we allow ourselves to, I guess, become stronger through our experiences of marginalization or oppression, or these oppressive sort of attacks that come. And so, you know, the banners and the flags were a way that I could kind of like speak to this and try and figure this out. These are all my questions. Okay, so let me just see. I'm going to go back. And this I have to skip because I'm going to have to go on my website to look at that. So I'm going to talk about this documentary project a little bit. Actually, no. Sorry, go back to my photos. So these images, these were just kind of these abstracts that I was experimenting with. And I wanted to I wanted to be like confrontational, and I wanted people to question what they were looking at and to kind of not understand and create a sense of discomfort and to make people really stop and try and figure things out, right? Because we're constantly looking at people and kind of having these snap judgments, right? Or we're being looked at and we're having these snap judgments made against us. But what happens when somebody really stops and takes a moment to think about, what am I actually looking at here? You know, what is this? And so I started doing these, and these are the beginning ones, creating these sort of landscapes of body hair. And I was thinking of body hair on male bodies as like, they mean so much, right? There's like, there can be a real sense of shame with body hair. There can be a real sense of pride with body hair, right? There's all this attachment to it. There's all these different ways. And then, so when we look at things like, what are we actually seeing? Take a minute and figure it out. And it was a really powerful moment for me, because I was having people come into my studio space and they were really confused. They were really confused. And so I remember having this art writer and critter, that's comical, art writer and critic.
That's funny.
Yeah. Come into my studio, and he sat down in the center of it. And he was an older man. And he sat down in the studio, and he kind of crossed his legs and crossed his arms, and he sat, and it was all the insults in these letterboard letters. And then it was all these images of the body hair. And he said, I feel really uncomfortable in here. He said, in a good way. I mean that as a compliment. And then he started talking about his own relationship and his family relationship to body hair. And it was fascinating, like it was this information that now I was becoming privileged to, but speaking to like exactly what I was saying. The people that I was using were somewhat proud. And so that's why I had reached out, because I had seen them, publicly on display. And so it was really like this kind of moment where I started thinking about, well, how do we sort of distort the perception and allow ourselves to look into it from another angle? Also part of that being like the history of these kind of body landscape images and women's bodies and how they like were used as this sort of object. So can we turn that lens? How is the gaze inverted? How do we work through all this stuff? Is it possible? Is it a desire to invert that gaze? Is that right? So kind of thinking along those lines. And so working that way, and I'm going to go back to it sort of and what it leads to, but then I'm going to just talk about this project, which is a documentary project that, actually, no, I'm sorry. Let me go back to that. Sorry, apparently I deleted a bunch of images by accident. So from those images, it sort of just continued to develop. And that, let me see, photos. Okay, we're on them. That led me to think about representation and who we do see, right? And who we don't see. And what a reclining nude in art history looks like, and who do we see in that? And the additional bodies in that, right? What are they doing? How are they positioned? What are the conversations around the models that existed in those spaces? And so I I started using these experimenting, and there were a lot of failures, and this is part of the practice too. There were a lot of failures in my experiments, right? I made this over and over again until I came to this image. You know, when I was working with people with all different body size and age ranges, and people who had different variations and expressions of gender variations, and then this was kind of where I landed. You know, I was like, well, what's the first reclining nude of a Black woman that I can think of? And I thought about this image over top Scatman Crothers' bed in The Shining. This black velvet, nude, busty, you know, curvy object sort of positioning. And then I used my friend Monique, who, you know, changes what that looks like. Right? What do we expect? How ambiguous can we get in this depiction? And then moving forward from there. So just kind of thinking about what a reclining nude can be. And then let me go back, yeah. So how does that continue to develop? You know, what is that sort of representation? And that's ongoing for me. So all this work now is really like current work. And so this project is margin. So after Trump was elected, I decided that I needed to do something very active in order to you know, counter the violence that was reinvigorated from the top down. So I ran for Ms. Philly Leather, and I won that title. And you know, I was using the platform to fundraise for queer trans communities of color as a way to sort of bottom up, right? So if we're experienced top down, like how do we bottom up? If the people who are most marginalized and most oppressed and most in danger in our society are taken care of, then the rest of us are going to be okay. So, but then while, you know, really getting involved in the community, you know, kind of nationwide and then also worldwide online, I started seeing like, okay, well, there's something needs to happen for communities of color within the Leatherverse. And so this was a Leeway Art and Change funded project through Art and Change grant in 2017. And so I created these portraits working on this documentary. That's a video. I did all these interviews that just shows stories and visually validates, and will be, you know, it's in the William Way archives. It'll be shown in the William Way archives. I'm in the William Way Center in June 2022. It's in the Leather Archives and Museum in Chicago. And so now these are cataloged. This is a history that is cataloged, right? And so it's still developing. But it led to me being the visiting scholar at the Leather Archives and Museum. And it also allowed for then me to be elected to the board of members at the Leather Archives and Museum, in which created this programming that I just did for the last 6 months, I guess, of a people of color focused program on the archives and members of the community throughout history and in the present, who are have a lot to offer and a lot of stories to tell. And so it's been a really interesting sort of process to see and allow these things to unfold, again, listening and kind of moving my feet in a direction. So all right, so now to what I consider sort of like my heart and soul. of my practice. This is my super, super happy place, connecting right back to the beginning when I was talking about my fantasy world. So the sort of umbrella term I call this is sextra. It became like an ongoing film project, but it also includes the banners. It includes objects. I make sort of sculptural objects like merkins and the high heels, which have, you know, a history in sort of this like non-binary space. I bring my sort of eclectic group of friends and like-minded weirdos to play in front of the camera in the spirit of freedom and creativity. It has worked to sort of connect a community, which was something that I always did. I always had these friends that were very different and that all connected because we were all connecting based on like our spirit and our values. So it's transgressing space and time. It's utilizing the analog or analog visual cues in order to speak to sort of lost or underrepresented histories of Black and Indigenous people of color and LGBT plus people, while also imagining futures that transcends the marginalizations of these communities still today. So kind of time hopping. My subjects still sit in the same area, but they merge in these films to create conversations around power and the continual struggle to topple white supremacy and patriarchal systems. I ask these questions in my work: who has agency, who has power, who's in charge, who's sexy, who is acceptable, who can express sexuality freely, who gets objectified, what is a pervert, what is a deviant. None of it is a request to belong. It's about authenticity. It's about liberation. It's about love. It's about showing us and what all that can look like. So just still, so I'd like to show some of these, you know, some clips of the videos. They're a little bit long, but you'll be able to find them on my website or Vimeo if you'd like. So let me show. So let me see, I can talk about it a little bit. I'm just going to stop for a minute and I'm just going to kind of explain the structure of this. And then I'm going to bounce ahead to show like a little bit of the action in the beginning. So I'm using sound-driven, I'm using sound to drive the work. There is a little bit of dialogue that enters, but it's always offset, sort of like disorient again. What am I looking at? What's going on? I'm using a handheld approach to sort of symbolize this sort of viewing or being a part of it, and also the sort of like violence that exists in relationship to bodies. So there's an unsettled way that can translate. And then I'm going to skip ahead. So this is basically the beginning. I introduce all of the characters, and then in the middle is where they sort of connect. Every character is based on a sexual deviance. And, you know, so some of the work that I was like researching at this time was like Jack Halberstam's female masculinity and female perversions. Trying to think of some of the other books that I read that kind of really went into this work, but let me just jump ahead a little bit. Let's see.
Yes, hello, sir.
Hello. Yes, of course.
Peaches.
Absolutely.
Bananas, bananas.
Enchanté.
Let me double bag your dollar dog.
Cold lunch. Hot lunch.
Ugh. Hot lunch. Cold lunch.
Let me see. I want to pop over to the other one just to show a little bit of like sort of the connections that are created between the characters and how they jump from film to film. So just show a little bit of this. I'm going to show sort of the introduction and then I'll pop ahead just to show you a little bit and then I'll stop.
Bonsoir.
This will be the last clip, but I want you all to see kind of Jack Cooper from where we started to here.
Damn dog! Scallywag! Get out of here, you damn!
So I will stop there. Since then, I've made a lot of like really short films. Another one with Cooper we made was a wizard. I made a series of films based on the names of strip clubs that I worked in the past, and Wizards was Cooper's. So we did this sort of moving portrait, you know, and so the brainstorming through the process is hilarious because we're, you know, like calling each other up and like, you know, and sending each other messages. And this is part inspiration. And so I say that to like also talk about how those characters are built and how those actions are taken. Like it's magic. It's pure magic. I'm giving them a prompt. I would never tell my friend, can you suck on this banana? Like, no, I would never say that. That was all him. Like, so the work doesn't work without the people that I use. They are bringing so much of themselves and their imagination and creativity to the process, and things are appearing, right? Like I had a scene I was filming at the end of that, and I said, well, I want this evil organ music to play. And the character I had playing that, and the person I had playing that character actually had an organ in their house. Like, just, you know, you can't make it up. It was, but it feels like, okay, that's, you know, I'm doing the right thing or something. That's my cue from the spirit world. But yeah, anyway, there was something else I was going to say, but I've said so much. Anybody have any questions or comments or whatever?
I just want to say thank you. And I think, I think you have taught me a lot just in these whatever 60 minutes. I kind of don't want to leave from the film because I wrote down things from the photography. So I kind of want to stay in the films for a little bit while we're still there and it's still present. And so anybody else has questions, just unmute yourself because we're a small group. I find them amazing, and they're structured, like they're slow structured, right? They're very detailed orientated, and they're observational, like you're taking your time and you're creating these relationships. And they're unlike anything I've ever seen. So I want to watch the whole thing.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
I'll chime in on the films real quick if that's okay. I just started learning filmmaking myself in a program I was in. It's super time intensive. These are really long, and so how do you go about planning them out, and what kind of do you budget for these? Are you looking for grant money for this work? Was this all during school? You know, there's a lot of costuming. Obviously, you've got mansions involved. You know, I have a lot of lofty goals as well, and I wonder how do you approach these projects? Because the longest film that I've done so far is like, I think, 3.5 minutes, and it was a massive time commitment and undertaking. So I'm just curious, and especially in terms of equipment too. Are you just doing it all sort of run and gun handheld in editing yourself? I would love to hear more about your process a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much. I will say I did just receive a Leeway transformation grant, so I will be able to pay my subjects. Everybody has volunteered their time, so that's a big thing. And I'm so happy that I can give some money away now. Like I did it for the margin project, so it felt really good. But I'm super DIY. Like I sit in the place of availabilism. I ask people to use their spaces, like all those different spaces that you see. I just like, oh, like, okay, like, oh, you have that house, like, you know, friend of a friend. Can I use it sometime to make a film? You know, they came out, they said, are you filming a porno? I said, no. But, you know, it's like, I'm just asking and going, you know, and I've been doing that since the beginning. The costumes. I am a hunter. I have catalogs of clothing up in my attic that I store, that I can pull from. But I thrift. It's just in my veins. It's how I grew up. The first one I showed you, extracurricular, I might have spent $100 to make that film. So it's like, I try to be super like low budget and super, you know, and like I said, there's a lot of magical things that happen. I didn't show the scene, but there's this scene in Thirst Trap where it's a fat Black femme with a like celebrating like in a food fetish, and she's got these two servants, and they're dressed as Black Panthers, and but I didn't have the right costumes for them, and so I got into the apartment that I was using as a set that day, and I said, oh, I really wanted to have these like Black, like you know, cop kind of coats for you to wear, and the woman whose apartment was said, well, I have a couple Black leather jackets. And she took them out and they fit both of the actors perfectly. Like, you know, I can't make this shit up. Like, I'm like, wow, okay, right? Like, so it's just really, really like when I say that, it's like, I can't get into all of the different ways that things have unfolded in that way. But yes, I shoot on my camera that has film capacity or capabilities. I edit everything. A friend does the sound, and then I arrange the sound. So, when I started in grad school, somebody said to me, this is a really film-based, video-based program. And I said, I never, ever want to do that. It's too much work. Mm-hmm. And now it's like, because I love it so much, it's not at all. I'm also sloppy, fast, want to do things, you know what I mean? Like, so it's like, it doesn't, I guess maybe it just depends on like your process too. But I do think it's such a magical space. And I'm so glad to hear that you like have entered that, because it's a progression. And if you're dealing with your body, then you're dealing with bodies, and then that lends to it too.
Exactly. That's why I was so excited to see your film work too. And I really appreciate your answer. You know, when you, because I never once wanted to do film either and was forced to as part of my program, mm-hmm. and really fell in love with it. But do you now think, when you think of new projects, do you think, oh, should that be a photo project? Should that be a film project? Like, where's your headspace? Like, do you now think of different media? You know, because also you did textiles too. So when you come up with, when you have an idea, do you try to now filter it through different possible mediums? Is that where you're sort of at? Which is where a lot of, you know, like people who do work, you know, like you're doing it, do, you know, obviously. Filter through different sort of mediums. Is that what you do now? You think, whereas before you might have just shot photos, now do you think, is this better as video? Is that how your process works now?
I'm sort of like, I mean, with the Margin project, the photos are integral to that project, and I really like the portraits for that. But like for my like conceptual practice, I kind of always think in moving images now, and I think that comes out of the space that the images I was making prior to it were all very performative. And so the reason I started making film was someone said, well, why isn't this a video? Because it's very performative. And I couldn't deny that that observation was correct. And so I stepped into that world. Now I am trying to kind of return to, how can I do a photograph again? And that is a bigger challenge than anything. But like the textiles come as natural. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, this idea goes to a textile. Like, it's like I don't think about it. It's very intuitive, and the film stuff is intuitive too. So yeah, just now I have to work on of still images. Yeah.
Thank you. I could ask you a million questions. I'm going to shut up. Thank you so much.
And you can always reach out to me too, because I love having these conversations. Juno?
Yeah. Thank you for including the just enough of your process to really be able to see what it is you're trying to do and what you have done. So I really appreciate that. And I absolutely see this continuum from the early portraits to the video. So it's interesting that you say you want to try and figure out how to get back to the still, because that would seem, you know, an obvious direction to go. Not obvious in a bad, boring way, but obvious in a really full circle way. Yeah, and I love the DIY aspect in terms of the handheld and all of that. I mean, it would be totally different if you were on a, you know, whatever you call it, on a roller, or on a whatever. It wouldn't have even half the same impact, you know, in my mind as it does with the handheld. So it's really interesting, and the word authenticity, in the context that you said it earlier, keeps sticking with me, you know, throughout all the projects. So
thank you so much. That means a lot to hear. It really does. When I was filming that last scene I showed with Jack Cooper, and we were in FDR Park, and he looked at me and he said, all these people are looking at us and they think we're acting. I was like, they think we're acting, but we're not acting. This is our life. This is what we do. And I just was like, yes, that's what this is about. You know, that's what this is about. Like, being able to be, period.
The aesthetics, the technical, it's just unburdened. I mean, I feel like I'm watching something that is absolutely unburdened by, and I think it achieves what you are trying to achieve, and what you've said, it's freeing. And I was really, really excited to hear about how unburdened you are, even in the technical process of it. You know, that really, for me, that was helpful, because I'm a little bit with Jacob, intimidated, have done some short films, and I felt burdened by the expectations of the medium. So thank you, Heather, because I feel like you've lessened that, you've lightened it. Yeah, good. That's great. Yeah.
But I'd love to hear that.
Love to hear from some more people. If anybody has anything to add. I want to comment on your photography, and it was so beautiful to see, because I've seen pictures here and there. I feel like I haven't seen the section. So for me, this was beautiful to make all the connections, like Juno said. And I just, I kind of want to ask you about something you said in the beginning. And I just want you to sort of work with it, because I feel like I think we all work with it, but failure as a way to resist in the social context, social constructs in our society. And it's, you know, it's part of the title of your talk. And I think, you know, I think it's like this very Zen thing to let the failure, to be in the flow of all of, you know, the failure and the successes. And I just would love to hear a little bit more.
Failure as a way to be. Yeah. You know, I guess at the moment of, if I can reflect on my own experience, and I can think about like what has propelled me since I was a kid, and how it's sort of the same. There was never an ability to fit, right? So so how do you reconcile that, right? If you are going to fit and that's important to you, right? It's like you have to be somewhat inauthentic if the thing that is authentic about you does not fit, right? And so, right, there's not always a choice in that, right? Or, you know, or if you make that choice, right, it's going to provide you with a lot of misery. And so I guess the embracing of the failure, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't get upset. It doesn't mean that I don't go into spaces like I've talked about going to Penn. It's like, you know, I went in there and I felt like I was like, this isn't like, I don't belong here. And of course I don't, right? I don't have that lineage. That's what they're based in. And so, but then like deciding like, no, like I deserve to be here just like anybody else, just because, you know, and understanding that, and understanding that when I look around, you know, I enter a new space and I see all these people grouping up together and clicking up, and I go, what's wrong with me? You know, oh, what's wrong with me? Why don't I fit? And then I find my people. But I still have those knee-jerk reactions. Like I'm outside of the thing. And then I have to remember like, oh, but that's okay, because where you are, you're going to find lasting, true, authentic, deep, personal relationships, you know, whether it be to the institution and myself, whether it be to classmates, colleagues, whatever it may be, to my artwork, you know, like that is the thing that continually exists. And so, you know, remembering that this is not content for everybody. It's okay. Like I'm not going to fit in every art space, and that's okay, because I probably don't want to, you know, like, and so understanding that being myself means these other things. And it's funny because like, I think about my transition from like, you know, preteen to teenage years, and how I just went like, I was like, I'm going to step into this space and I'm going to just be complete weirdo and kind of alienate myself. You can't alienate me. I'm alienating myself because I don't belong to you and you don't belong to me. You're not my people. It's okay. Right. Doesn't mean that I don't still kind of love freely, because I do, but also like understanding that I am a sovereign. I am an autonomous person. Like I have my own autonomy. I don't have to belong to places and align myself with ideas that I don't believe in. I don't have to adhere to that and be miserable in life. And just because I live that way also doesn't mean that somebody else can't, and that they can't be happy, right? It also means that like we all are entitled to the decisions that we make, or being true to the ways that we exist. You know, and I think that same kind of sensibility comes out of camp. You know, it's like this also this going in and kind of like looking at these systems and then deconstructing them and making them over the top and absurd, you know, and that too is a way to further that conversation in the DIY, right? Like all these things kind of wind up existing together and just, you know, creating this kind of like, yeah, the space. That's all I'll say is space.
And I'll carry what Jack said too in the middle of filming. I'm going to carry that forever. That seemed very important and key. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Betsy admits she's been smiling throughout. It's been great. Do you want to say something real quick, Betsy? It's almost time to quit.
No, you can go.
Oh, you're muted again. Can you try it again?
I just wanted to say very quickly that my 22-year-old granddaughter has just announced that she is is non-binary, and she's changed her name, and she's studying filmmaking and she's a writer, and I would very much like to offer her the opportunity to see the video of this, because I think it would be so touching and important for her.
Please do. I'll just share my website link. I'm sure it's somewhere, but I'll share my website link.
Made for this person to see.
This is what is important to me because, you know, as a person who kind of came up without people to connect with, and that's what I found, you know, as soon as I moved to Philly, all in the family specifically, it was like everybody was mixed, you know, it was just this wonderful, wonderful, weird space, you know. I'm putting my thing in there, but I think it's important to know that there's others out there, that there's other people doing these things. You know, I talked about yesterday with a friend about, you know, there's people who have forged paths for us, you know, and I thanked her. It's a mentor. I thanked her for helping me to find the path and to follow her rather than being alongside of the path, like trying with a machete to chop down all the trees. It's like, no, there's already, you know, there's always people, you know, and it's just sometimes that it's the matter of finding them and then to understand also how large of a swath that can be, you know, how large of a population and community that can actually be when you're open to letting that happen.
Thank you, Heather. This was very moving, and you were so generous, and I'm so happy that you could share your work today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, you know, thanks everybody for being here and for the feedback. Like that's a lot, you know, it's doesn't necessarily come every day. And it's like nice to hear when, you know, it's understood. But alas, anybody wants to get in touch with me or talk more, blah, blah, blah. The information is in the chat, or you can find it on my website or whatever. It's out there.
Can we make a plug for the current exhibition at Pinch Hitters?
I didn't even talk about that. Yeah. So I have a gallery on the front of my house. I created it last year, and this year received a little bit of funding for it. And so doing like receptions and the current show is Lori Waselchuk, who is showing the t-shirt project, Sweet Tea Project. And it's incredible. We had an opening last week and it was so great. It was just, you know, first opening. The project is perfect for the opening of this. Yeah, so it was like sort of this, you know, I don't know, clotheslines of all these beautiful t-shirts. And now they're existing against my home, but I'm on 9th and Shunk in South Philly. If anybody wants to like ride by, you'd see the work right out there. And I have Pinch Hitter projects on Instagram if you want to follow. I will be having another opening next month. I can't tell you the date because I can't remember that offhand, but and also I'm always open to discussing like the possibilities of showing work in that space.
Thank you for that. And it was really great. So happy Juneteenth and happy Pride Month, and have a great summer. OSNAP is not going to meet in July, but we'll be back in August. We'll be doing portfolio sharing for people who wish to present some new work or old work or whatever, volunteer, and we support and provide feedback and be there for whatever that artist is asking for. So that's going to be the 3rd Saturday of August, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
It was fascinating, really amazing.
Glad you enjoyed it.
And I want to really say that starting as an only child in your own background stage that you create yourself and reach all the way where you are today, we can just say more than well done.
Thank you so much, Effie. I appreciate it.
Heather,
Take care, everybody.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Same here. Bye-bye.